The word hero and legend is much overused in this business, but we certainly have one for you this morning. Simon Weston, how are you?
I'm very well, thanks, Alex. Yeah, very good.
True privilege to talk to you today. And of course, we're on talking about the Falklands 25 years ago, almost to the day since it kicked off. What I'd like to do with you today is find out your entire story and how it kind of happened for you right from the beginning. How old were you, and when did you find out that you were actually going to the Falklands?
I was 20 years of age, and I found out that I was going, but quite simply when I was in a pub in the local village I'm from in South Wales, a little village called Nelson, and I was there with some friends. We were given some leave after being on Spearhead Battalion for about 4 or 6 weeks or whatever it was, and all these regimental names came up on the TV, and somebody pointed them out to me and said, "Isn't that yours, the Welsh Guards?" And I went, "Ah." He said, "Well, you've got to go back to barracks tomorrow." So I looked and watched and listened to what they had to say, and that's how I found out that pretty much we were the ones that were going to be going, and all the other agencies that were tasked as well at the same time.
I just spent a couple of months at BFBS in Germany doing some entertaining for the troops, and the one thing that struck me right from the beginning was the bravery and the absolute devotion of the young soldiers. How do you react at 20 when you find out something like you're being sent to the Falklands? Obviously you wouldn't know what was going to transpire and occur.
I don't think you really think about it too much the first time you go into that type of situation. If you knew what you were going to face, you'd be a lot more, or you'd have a lot more trepidation. But the simple case was we didn't really know what we were going to find. We'd been involved in several things in Northern Ireland, some small firefights and some people killed, and bombing situations and riots and what have you. But they don't hold a candlelight to the true horrors of what conflict and that type of vicious conflict could hold. And it really was a vicious war, even though it was only short. The battles for those hillsides were very, very intense, and anybody dug in and got the positions that the Argentinians had were going to be able to defend them quite easily. But I don't think they'd bargain for the tenaciousness of the British soldier who was going to be coming up at them.
I don't know whether you have an opinion on this, Simon, but it appears to me that the vindictiveness of what's going on in places like Fallujah and Afghanistan, particularly at the moment, seems to parallel what went on in the Falklands in those attacks. I don't know how you feel about that.
The thing is, when the insurgents, the terrorists, or I suppose one man's terrorist, another man's freedom fighter, but they have a different thought process. They don't wear a uniform to start with. If they did, it would make it much easier to identify them and be able to fight them. But whilst they still live in the civilian garb and hide behind the skirts of women and the school satchels of children, then it's very hard to fight those type of people, because it's a very cowardly way of doing it. But we have to respect the fact that this is the way they've chosen to fight, and we have to adapt to their tactics. The sad thing is they adapt to our tactics far quicker. For everything that we do, they're able to sit down, think about it, because let's be honest about it, they have nothing else to do. It's a bit like prisoners thinking about how to break out of jail. That's all they have to do. So they spend hours and weeks planning different things, and they're able to change their tactics much more quickly than we are, and they're then much more effective in their ability to cause the instant bloody nose, but not to be able to win the battle in the long term. But they do cause a lot of disruption, and they do cause a lot of serious injury and a lot of serious deaths, and they cause a lot of embarrassment as well. But the viciousness that the insurgents fight with is, yes, the intensity is just as deep as it was in the Falklands.
I was asked to go to the Falklands last year. I was there in October and November, and I can't make it because of doing this show. But one thing that did strike me was how far away it is. You forget. I mean, it's a 15-hour flight, isn't it?
18. Yeah. 18 hours. It's... If you include the hour and a half, 2 hours stopover in Ascension Island, it's just over 18 hours, and it's an absolute killer. It's an awful journey.
What is going through your mind when you're on that plane?
To be honest, what are we going to get to eat, and what are we going to get, and when are we going to get there, and what's the weather going to be like when we get there? Quite simply, it's just a journey. To me now, I don't think too much about what went on 25 years ago with regards to the journey. I remember the first time I went back, and I don't remember the journey there. I remember the journey all the way home, but I don't remember the journey there. The journey there was one that was quite horrendous, really, because all sorts of things were going through my mind, and I was making that journey again for the first time, and I was going to be visiting my demons, and I came to the reality and the realization that the only thing that was haunting me was me. I was the person who was putting all the pressure on myself about what went on or didn't go on, about what I did and didn't do, what I could or couldn't do. But that's the nature of the beast. That's what most people tend to do. We tend to beat ourselves up, have terrible nightmares, and when we get down there, we realize that it's just a place. It's just like a place like any other unique history. And, it doesn't really hold any ghosts. And when you see the place, you fully understand it. It's a great cathartic experience to go back and to be able to revisit all those scenes and sites, and to actually look where people fought up some of those cathedrals of doom. Those mountains are incredibly hard. The Paras, the Scots Guards, the Marines, they did a phenomenal job when they fought up those terrible places, and they really are horrendous, tortuous mountains, but they're majestic in the same way, and they're so graceful as they spine their way across the islands.
Once you arrived at the Falklands, what happened next?
We arrived down in the Falklands. We were put on land. We transferred from the Kiwi 2 to the Canberra at South Georgia, and we sailed through the fleet, which we'll never see again because we couldn't muster that many ships. We don't have that many ships. We've probably got about 15 or 16 lying in dry dock now, or lying in dock ready to be scrapped. And to be sold off to other countries. But we were then sailed through the fleet into San Carlos water. We were put on land for about a week. We were marched up the top of the hill, marched back down the hill. There was all sorts of shenanigans. People didn't really know how best to move us from one place to another. We were held for far too long in one place. If we'd have been sent on our march sooner, we'd have been in position a lot sooner. We wouldn't have had to sail. But they didn't do that for us. They put us on board ships, thought it was more expedient. There was a lot of cock-ups that went along with all of that. We got taken off HMS Fearless and put onto the Sir Galahad, and the Sir Galahad was in a little place called Port Pleasant for far too long. The naval captain in charge of the amphibious assault, a guy called Clapp, he ordered us to set sail anyway, which left us in a perilous situation, left us abandoned in the daylight, and we got bombed, but these things happen in war. You have to accept that war is a terrible thing.
Now, we just spoke about how you arrived at the Falklands, how you found out that you were going in the first place. Once you were there, obviously you went straight into battle. Explain to me what happened the day that you got injured, how they helped you, how you managed to get yourself out of the situation, and how you're still here with us today when many of your colleagues aren't.
Well, what happened on the day that we got injured, like I said earlier, we were there for far too long. We had no
Whose
cover.
fault was that?
I think it was the fault of many different people. The landing craft that was supposed to be waiting for us, that were under the control of a guy called Sotheby Taylor. He'd let them be taken by the Paras. And we can't complain about that. Their boss was doing the best for his boys, just like our us. So they'd gone. Sotheby Taylor then ordered us to get onto a thing called a Mexi float, which our boss at the time said no way, because it was exposed and there was ammunition and vehicles on board, which would have been an easy target, which unfortunately it did become later. And so we were left on board for far too long with no way of getting off the ship, which then made us an easy target. We got hit. All hell broke loose. There were people on flame and dying in front of me, around me, people with limbs missing. One chap was attached to the wall in the white hot metal because of the blast that impaled him on something or stuck him to something. I don't really know what, but he was trying to get himself off with his own bayonet, but died there. There was a lot of horrors to be witnessed inside. And I was then able to find my way out, get to the top of the ship, and to be airlifted off. I believe I was one of the first to be airlifted off, but it didn't feel that short a period of time to me. It felt like forever. But in that period of time I tried to help somebody, but sadly he died in my arms, and that's how my hands got so badly burnt. But these things happen. It is conflict, and it is the viciousness and the vagaries of war. Some people live, some people die, and some people are horribly injured, like I was.
I presume you can't be trained to deal with that kind of situation and cope with it.
No, what could teach you? You can be trained to deal with other people's injuries. That most guys, I think nearly everybody in the British military is trained to do first aid at a very high level. but the rest of it is just totally untrainable. You cannot train people to be a victim or a patient, and that's. It's sad, but it's good in a way, because this comes as a shock, and you don't know how to react. So hopefully you'll react with a great deal of stoicism, and you'll react with a great deal of acceptance in the whole situation, and move forward with it rather than let it drag you down and take you to the bottom with the ship.
When all that was going on around you, what was your first instinct? Did you think, I'm going to die? Was your instinct to save others or just to get out? How did you psychologically cope with that?
I tried to help somebody, but he died in my arms. I then thought we'd been hit with napalm, and I was trying to look for my gun. I thought, if I'm going to die horribly, stuck in this flaming hell, then I'll kill myself. Then I felt a small waft of air, so I ran out. So it was a whole series of things, but, you just, survival kicks in, I suppose, at the end. Is
fear then the last emotion that you're actually going through?
Fear didn't play a part in it at all. Most people play a part of acceptance. If you have long to think about it, then fear will register.
How do you think about the whole thing now? Do you view it as something that was unnecessary, something that was necessary, something that you were proud to be part of, or something that should never have occurred in the first place? What is your understanding of it 25 years on?
I had a letter from Sir John Nott, who was Defence Secretary at the time, who said, "I'm so sorry for your part in what was clearly an unnecessary war," which really helped matters a tremendous amount. But, that's just the way that obviously he knew more than we knew. For me, when politicians do or don't do their job, can or can't do their job, or will or won't do their job, or are inept at the end of the day, the fact is service people have to go and do their job. They were British subjects, top and bottom. They have the right to their own democracy. They have their right to self-determination. What they wanted was more important than what we wanted as soldiers. We had a job to do, soldiers, sailors, airmen, we had a job to do, and our job was to protect British subjects, top and bottom. Always the right thing to do when politicians fail, which they do sadly too regularly, and hence you've only got to look at what's happening in the Middle East.
Simon, how difficult is it for you seeing our boys coming back maimed and dead from Iraq when someone described this war as immoral or even illegal? It is quite possible that in 25 years' time we might be saying the same about Iraq that we are doing now about the Falklands, that it's just pointless.
First things first, we'll go from top to bottom. Nobody will look back in 25 years and think that the Iraqi war was worthwhile. Afghanistan maybe, but I think they're untenable wars and unwinnable wars, purely and simply because when people have absolutely nothing to lose, then all we're doing is providing them with a focus, and that's what the insurgents, that's what the Taliban, the Al-Qaeda have now, and they also have a recruiting model. The fact is, Iraq was completely illegal. There is no justification for being there.
So the soldiers who have died at war in Iraq are just dying for no reason. It's all worthless.
I suppose their sacrifice is nothing's worthless. I mean, that's a terrible word to use in many ways, but I think it's just a tragedy that could have been avoided. We shouldn't have sent our people, and we shouldn't have wasted their lives in this way. Whatever Saddam Hussein was, they say 3.5 million people in 35 years. What's never been actually reported is how many of those 3.5 million were killed in the Iran-Iraq war, and most of the 3.5 million were actually in the Iran-Iraq war. Although any murder by any government is wrong. He was a horror, he was a monster, but not the complete picture that is being painted. I'm not defending the guy, but I'm just trying to put it into a greater context. So invading his country, and why not Zimbabwe against Mugabe?
Absolutely.
Who's literally starving to death 8.5 million people because they don't vote his way. And how many people has he put to death? We really don't know the true picture over there. But there's no oil in Zimbabwe. There's only the richest Garden of Eden in the world, and that's the tragedy of it.
Simon, very finally, how are you? Are you okay? How are you dealing with all this 25 years on? Presumably it's playing with your head again and making you go back to those days.
Yeah, I've had a few flashbacks to it, but not a great deal, and it hasn't really bothered me in a negative way. It's been quite cathartic in many ways, because I've met up with so many of the guys that I served with. I've reacquainted myself with so many of my friends that, just through time and experiences we've separated. And just the other day I was speaking to a chap that I served with in the same platoon in the rifle company before I went to the mortars, and I was able to talk to him, and I haven't spoken to him for over 20 years. So it's bringing a lot of us back together, and we pick up the conversation from where we once left it, because we were so familiar with each other. It's not been all doom and gloom, although the time and the situation that made us once very strong brothers in arms has gone. But I wanted to make the documentary about going back so much because of the people who were involved in my life, and some of the people I never knew then and I've got to know since, and that's really what it's all about. So hopefully people on the 11th of June will be able to watch this documentary on the History Channel and see just what it takes to keep people alive in combat. So the war was one thing, but keeping people alive after the war had gone wrong for them was another thing. There's a whole other story.
Thanks for joining us on the show.
Cheers, Alex. Thanks a lot.